This isn't conspiracy. This is documented reality. Welcome to the Scribble Fact.
There are books so dangerous that simply owning them has gotten people murdered.
On a quiet London morning in February 1989, a man picked up his phone and heard a death sentence issued by an entire government on the other side of the world.
Over the next 33 years, at least 53 people would die because of a single book. Translators assassinated, publishers firebombed, bookstores burned to the ground.
This is the story of the most dangerous books ever written, and the brutal price of putting words on paper.
Salman Rushdie was 41 years old and already famous when he published the Satanic Verses in September 1988. The Indian-born British author had won the Booker Prize. He was living comfortably in North London, married to American novelist Mary Ann Wiggins.
His new novel was ambitious, a magical realist exploration of faith, immigration, and identity. Parts of it featured dream sequences satirizing the founding of Islam.
On February 14th, 1989, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa on live radio, declaring that Rushdie and everyone involved in publishing the book must be executed. He offered a bounty, $1.5 million for anyone who killed the author.
Think about that for a moment. A head of state on official government radio, ordering the murder of a novelist on Valentine's Day.
The bounty has increased over the decades. Today, it stands at over $4 million.
Within days, the violence began. On February 24th, 12 people died in riots in Bombay. Book burnings swept across England. The novel was banned in India, Pakistan, South Africa, Bangladesh, Sudan, and eventually over 20 countries.
Rushdie went into hiding immediately. British police assigned him 24-hour protection under the codename Operation Malachite. For nearly 10 years, he lived in safe houses, moving every few days, using aliases, wearing disguises.
But he wasn't the only target. On July 3, 1991, Ettore Capriolo, the Italian translator of the Satanic Verses, was stabbed in his apartment in Milan. He survived. 8 days later in Tokyo, Hitoshi Igarashi wasn't so lucky.
Igarashi was a professor of comparative literature at the University of Tsukuba. He was 44 years old. Someone walked into his office and stabbed him multiple times in the face and neck. The killer was never found.
2 years later in Norway, publisher William Nygaard was shot 3 times outside his home in Oslo. He survived, but spent months recovering. The attacker escaped and was never identified.
Let's be clear about what was happening. These weren't random acts of violence. This was a coordinated international assassination campaign against people whose only crime was translating or publishing a work of fiction.
The Turkish translator Aziz Nesin wasn't directly killed, but his involvement led to one of the deadliest incidents. On July 2, 1993, an angry mob set fire to the Madimak Hotel in Sivas, Turkey, where Nesin was attending a cultural festival.
37 people burned to death. Nesin escaped, but he died 2 years later, reportedly from health complications caused by the trauma. The hotel stood as a burned-out shell for years, a monument to religious extremism.
Meanwhile, Rushdie remained in hiding. His marriage to Mary Ann Wiggins collapsed under the pressure. He married again, and that marriage also failed. His son grew up barely knowing his father, who appeared at rare intervals under police escort.
By the late 1990s, the Iranian government signaled it would no longer actively pursue the fatwa. Rushdie slowly emerged from hiding, began appearing in public again, moved to New York City, remarried for a 4th time.
In 2007, Queen Elizabeth knighted him. He became Sir Salman Rushdie. He wrote openly about his experiences. He seemed, finally, to be free.
On August 12, 2022,
Rushdie was on stage at the Chautauqua Institution in Western New York, about to give a lecture on writers in exile. A man rushed the stage and stabbed him repeatedly.
The attackers stabbed Rushdie at least 10 times in the face, neck, and abdomen before being tackled by audience members. The author was airlifted to a trauma center in critical condition.
He survived, but barely. Rushdie lost sight in one eye. He lost the use of one hand. 33 years after a government put a price on his head for writing a novel, someone finally managed to nearly kill him.
The attacker, 24-year-old Hadi Matar from New Jersey, pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors found evidence he was sympathetic to Iranian revolutionary causes and Shia extremism. But he acted alone, self-radicalized online, inspired by a fatwa issued before he was even born.
This is the terrifying reality of book banning and religious censorship. It doesn't end. The ideas metastasize. The violence perpetuates itself across generations.
Throughout history, certain books have been deemed so dangerous that governments, religious institutions, and ideological movements have tried to erase them from existence. Some for political reasons, some for religious ones. Some simply because they told uncomfortable truths.
Let's talk about a book that redefined what it means to challenge authority. George Orwell's 1984. Published in 1949, this dystopian masterpiece became a weapon that governments couldn't ignore. The Soviet Union banned it immediately. They saw too much of themselves in Big Brother's totalitarian regime. China followed suit. Even the United States tried to ban it in some schools during the Cold War, fearing it would make students sympathetic to communism. The irony? Orwell was warning against all forms of authoritarianism, left and right.
The book introduced concepts that terrified authorities worldwide. Thought crime, newspeak, the Ministry of Truth. These weren't just fictional concepts. They were mirrors held up to real government practices. When the USSR banned it, they confiscated every copy they could find. Possessing it meant years in the Gulag. In China, even mentioning the title could get you investigated.
But here's what makes Orwell's story fascinating. The more governments tried to suppress 1984, the more people wanted to read it. Samizdat copies circulated in the USSR. Hand-typed carbon copies passed secretly between dissidents. Each copy risked imprisonment, but people kept reading. They kept spreading the message. Because Orwell had done something dangerous. He'd shown them their cage.
1653. A book was published that would become the most banned in European history. Not a political manifesto, not pornography, just a collection of stories. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Written during the Black Death of 1348, it told stories of people escaping the plague in a villa outside Florence. Stories of love, trickery, and human nature at its most honest. The Catholic Church immediately added it to the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the official list of banned books. It stayed there for over 400 years.
Why? Because Boccaccio had committed the ultimate sin in the Church's eyes. He portrayed clergy as human, flawed, corrupt, lustful. His stories showed monks chasing women, nuns taking lovers, priests lying for money. These weren't attacks on faith, they were observations of human behavior. But the Church saw them as dangerous propaganda. If people started questioning their priests, the entire power structure could collapse.
Across Europe, authorities burned copies publicly. In Spain, the Inquisition executed booksellers caught distributing it. In France, owning a copy meant excommunication. But like every banned book in history, suppression only increased demand. Underground publishers printed censored versions with the offensive passages removed. Ironically, this made readers desperate to find uncensored copies to discover what had been cut out. The ban had backfired spectacularly.
1922. James Joyce published Ulysses, a novel that would revolutionize modern literature and spend years banned across the English-speaking world. The book follows one day in the life of Leopold Bloom as he wanders through Dublin, its dense, experimental stream of consciousness, and it contains explicit sexual content that shocked censors. The United States banned it immediately. Britain followed. Even Ireland, Joyce's homeland, refused to allow its publication.
Us customs agents literally seized copies at the border and burned them. Not just refused entry, burned. The New York Society for the Suppression of Vice prosecuted anyone caught selling it. Bookstore owners went to jail. The crime, obscenity. Because Joyce had dared to write honestly about human sexuality and bodily functions. He described what people actually thought and felt, not what Victorian morality demanded they should think and feel.
The ban finally broke in 1933, when a judge named John Woolsey ruled that Ulysses was not obscene, but rather a serious work of art. His decision became a landmark in literary freedom. But think about what had been lost. 11 years where one of the most important novels of the 20th century was illegal to read in America. 11 years of cultural suppression because Joyce refused to lie about human nature.
1951. J.D. Salinger published The Catcher in the Rye, a novel about teenage angst and alienation that would become the most banned book in American schools. The story follows Holden Caulfield, a teenager expelled from prep school, wandering through New York City, wrestling with depression and the phoniness of adult society. It used realistic teenage language, including profanity. It discussed sex, alcohol, and mental health honestly, and parents lost their minds.
By the 1980s, The Catcher in the Rye was the most frequently banned book in American high schools. School boards across the country removed it from libraries. Why? Because it was anti-Christian, promoted immorality, used foul language. But the real reason ran deeper. Salinger had captured teenage consciousness authentically. He showed what teenagers actually thought about adults, authority, society. And that authenticity terrified the adults who wanted to control the narrative.
What's fascinating is that the book challenges peaked in the 1990s, 40 years after publication. Why? Because by then, The Catcher in the Rye had become a cultural touchstone. Everyone knew about it. Banning it became a symbolic act. Schools weren't protecting students from obscenity. They were trying to maintain a fantasy of innocent childhood that had never existed. Salinger had shown the emperor had no clothes.
1940. Arthur Koestler published Darkness at Noon, a novel about Stalin's show trials that exposed the brutal reality of Soviet communism. The protagonist, Rubashov, is an old Bolshevik revolutionary arrested during the Great Purge. Through his interrogation and execution, Koestler revealed how totalitarian ideology destroys even its most devoted believers. The Soviet Union and its satellite states banned it immediately. So did Spain under Franco. Even some Western countries tried to suppress it during their wartime alliance with Stalin.
In the Eastern Bloc, possessing Darkness at Noon was considered treason. The KGB maintained lists of people who had read it. Dissidents smuggled copies through the Iron Curtain, hiding them in hollowed-out books and false-bottom suitcases. The novel became samizdat legend, typed out on manual typewriters by brave individuals who knew they could be sent to the gulag for the act of copying. Each carbon copy set could produce maybe 7 readable copies. People risked everything to multiply this one book.
The irony is that Koestler himself was a former communist. He'd believed in the revolution. But the show trials, the purges, the systematic betrayal of every revolutionary ideal broke his faith. Darkness at Noon was his confession and his warning, and authoritarian regimes recognized the danger immediately. This wasn't an outsider attacking them. This was an insider revealing the truth. That's why they feared it more than any capitalist propaganda. Koestler knew where the bodies were buried.
There's one book that has been banned more than any other in modern history. Not for obscenity, not for political content, but because it chronicles a genocide that some countries refuse to acknowledge. The book is Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler's manifesto. Now before you react, hear me out. The question isn't whether Mein Kampf is evil. It obviously promotes horrific ideology. The question is whether banning it prevents or enables that ideology's spread.
Germany banned Mein Kampf for 70 years after World War II. Bavaria held the copyright and refused to allow reprints. In 2016, the copyright expired and an annotated critical edition was published with historians' notes debunking Hitler's claims on every page. The result? Sales were high, yes, but not among neo-Nazis. They bought it primarily among educators, historians, and people who wanted to understand how fascism seduced an entire nation. The annotations turned it from a manifesto into a cautionary tale.
Other countries took different approaches. Russia banned it and still does. So does Argentina, where many Nazis fled after the war. But France and the UK allow it with heavy taxation on sales, donating the proceeds to Holocaust education. The United States never banned it at all, treating it as protected speech, but culturally marginalizing it. Each country's approach reflects its own historical trauma and its philosophy about free speech versus dangerous ideas.
Here's the uncomfortable truth. Banning Mein Kampf doesn't eliminate Nazi ideology. Neo-Nazis have always found ways to access it. The ban just prevents scholars, students, and citizens from studying it critically. The German approach, allowing an annotated edition that systematically dismantles Hitler's arguments, may be more effective than outright prohibition. It says, "Here are the lies that seduced millions. Here's why they're lies. Learn from this so it never happens again." That's education, not censorship.
Sometimes the most effective book bans happen quietly, through corporate power. Take Amazon's silent removals. In 2017, they began deleting books promoting conversion therapy and anti-vaccine content. No press release, no explanation, just gone. Then in 2021, they banned a book questioning transgender medical treatments for minors. The author wasn't a conspiracy theorist, but a former academic. Amazon never explained which policy was violated. They just control nearly half of all book sales in America. So when they say no, a book effectively disappears from mainstream commerce.
This is the new censorship. Not dramatic book burnings or government raids, but quiet algorithmic deletions. A company decides what millions can read without public debate, judicial review, or democratic process. And it's not just Amazon. Apple iBooks has content guidelines. Kobo removed certain romance novels. These are private companies, so technically, they can sell what they want. But when a handful of corporations control the majority of book distribution, their editorial decisions have the power of law.
Then there's library censorship, which has exploded in the past 3 years. In 2022 alone, there were over 1,200 challenges to library books in the United States, more than double the previous year. The targets: books about LGBTQ identity, racial history, sexual education. The tactics: organized groups attending school board meetings, reading graphic excerpts out of context, demanding immediate removal. Many librarians, facing harassment and threats, simply pull books preemptively to avoid conflict. The chilling effect is real. Books aren't technically banned, they just quietly vanish from shelves.
The most challenged book in America in 2023. Gender Queer by Maya Kobabe, a memoir about non-binary identity. It was challenged over 1,000 times across the country. Second was All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, a memoir about growing up black and queer. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, a Nobel Prize winner's novel about racism. Flamer by Mike Curato. The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. The pattern is clear. Books by marginalized authors about marginalized experiences are being systematically targeted.
What's fascinating is the justification.
Parents say they're protecting children from inappropriate content. But many of these books are young adult literature, written for teens exploring their identity. They contain difficult themes because teenage life contains difficult themes. Banning them doesn't protect kids. It isolates the ones who need these stories most. A queer teen in a conservative town might never see themselves in literature. A black student might never read about their history outside sanitized textbooks. That's not protection. That's erasure.
Every book we've discussed was banned for a reason. Protecting religious morality, preventing political subversion, safeguarding children, preventing hate. These aren't cartoon villains twirling mustaches. They're people genuinely convinced that certain ideas are too dangerous to spread. And sometimes they might even be right that a book causes harm. Mein Kampf has inspired real violence. But here's the thing. The moment you grant someone the power to decide which books are too dangerous, you've granted them power over thought itself.
Because the people who ban books always believe they're the good guys. The Catholic Church banning heliocentric astronomy was protecting souls from damnation. The Soviets banning Animal Farm were protecting the revolution from capitalist propaganda. The Nazis burning Jewish books were protecting German culture. American school boards banning genderqueer are protecting children. Everyone's protecting something. But protected from what? From ideas that challenge the status quo. From perspectives that make people uncomfortable. From the possibility that what they believe might be wrong.
Here's what history teaches us. The books that get banned are usually the ones we need most. Galileo's dialogue was banned, but the Earth kept orbiting the sun. The Satanic Verses was banned, but questioning religion didn't destroy Islam. Ulysses was banned, but modernist literature flourished. To Kill a Mockingbird was banned, but conversations about racism continued. The ideas don't die. They just go underground, where they can't be openly discussed, critically examined, or properly understood. Banning creates forbidden fruit. It makes ideas more appealing, not less.
And let's be honest, in the age of the internet, book banning is almost quaint. You can ban the Satanic Verses from bookstores, but it's available as a PDF in 30 seconds. You can remove genderqueer from school libraries, but teens can order it on Amazon or download it illegally. The only thing censorship accomplishes now is sending a message about who belongs and who doesn't. It tells queer kids their stories don't matter. It tells black students their history is dangerous. It tells everyone that authority figures fear ideas more than they trust people to think critically.
Maybe the answer isn't choosing between absolute freedom and protective censorship. Maybe it's choosing trust. Trust that people can read difficult books without becoming extremists. Trust that teenagers can handle complex themes without being corrupted. Trust that when we encounter ideas we hate, we can counter them with better ideas instead of bans. The books we've discussed, from the Satanic Verses to Mein Kampf to genderqueer, they're uncomfortable. They should be. Comfortable books don't change anything. The question isn't whether books can be dangerous. They can. The question is whether we trust ourselves to handle that danger.
Ray Bradbury wrote Fahrenheit 451, the most famous book about book burning, because he feared television would make people stop thinking. But he had it backwards. The danger was never that books would burn. It's that people would stop caring. That we'd choose comfort over challenge. That we'd let algorithms and authority figures decide what we're allowed to read. Every banned book is a test. Not of whether the book is dangerous, but of whether we're brave enough to read it anyway. To sit with discomfort. To change our minds. To trust that the human mind is strong enough to encounter any idea and decide for itself.
So here's your challenge. Read something that makes you uncomfortable. Read a book your community has condemned. Read something from a perspective you disagree with. Not to be edgy or contrarian, but to exercise the muscle of critical thinking. Because the moment we stop doing that, the moment we let others decide what we're allowed to think, we've already lost something more important than any single book. We've lost the ability to think freely. And that's a kind of censorship no law can create and no ban can enforce. We do it to ourselves.
The history of banned books isn't just about censorship. It's about the eternal struggle between those who want to control narratives and those who insist on telling uncomfortable truths. Every book we've discussed was banned for threatening some form of power, religious authority, political stability, social norms, or moral certainty.
And here's the pattern that repeats across centuries. The books that were most dangerous in their time often become the most essential to understanding that time. The Satanic Verses helps us grasp the clash between artistic freedom and religious orthodoxy in the late 20th century. Lolita forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about desire and morality. All Quiet on the Western Front reminds us that patriotism can become propaganda.
The question isn't whether these books should exist. They do exist, and no amount of banning has ever made an idea disappear. The question is whether we have the courage to engage with ideas that challenge us, that make us uncomfortable, that force us to defend our beliefs with something more substantial than outrage.
Because here's what history teaches us about banned books. They never stay banned. Lady Chatterley's Lover is now taught in universities. Ulysses is considered one of the greatest novels ever written. The books that were too dangerous for one generation become the classics of the next. But the process of getting from banned to classic, that requires people willing to fight for the right to read, to publish, to think.
So here's your challenge. Read something that makes you uncomfortable. Read a book your community has condemned. Read something from a perspective you disagree with. Not to be edgy or contrarian, but to exercise the muscle of critical thinking. Because the moment we stop doing that, the moment we let others decide what we're allowed to think, we've already lost something more important than any single book. We've lost the ability to think freely, and that's a kind of censorship no law can create and no ban can enforce. We do it to ourselves.
Beyond the Surface, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next investigation.